Welcome to Matrix Tech Talk.
In this episode, Bonifaz Maag talks about how connected vehicles will shape up the user experience of future cars. In this episode, I'm super excited to have the CEO and the named partner of Kugler Maag company, Bonifaz Maag. Bonifaz, welcome to Matrix.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Bonifaz, you already mentioned that a spice is not going to be enough. We have already seen that ISO 26262 is not enough. We
Right.
have SOTIF.
Right.
So how your company is preparing for it, preparing to take advantage of the upcoming changes?
Well, one important aspect is for any major part of our business, and right now there are 5 automotive spies: agile, cybersecurity, functional safety, and what we call management consulting. We have a so-called expert area. Others call it area of competence, or many terms out there. But this is a group of people in our organization that, first of all, focuses on that area. So they hone their skills, they develop their skills in that regard. They develop our portfolio with regard to services we offer to our customers. They also work in industry working groups. They work with our customers on the next steps. So how does a second edition look like, or what should be in a second edition to feed the industry, to give feedback to the industry and the working groups as such. To understand what's ahead and to add that to our portfolio. So that's a key thing how we operate. And whenever we launch such an expert area, we want to make sure that we have a critical mass of people behind that. So that we first of all can support our customers, but also have a group of people that develop our portfolio.
Fascinating. Are you active in any of these working groups?
Yes, to a certain extent. So for instance, what we call management consulting is the expert area I'm working in right now. Before that, I was a part of the functional safety working group. I'm also one or 2 of these, in fact 3 right now, expert areas are expert areas I'm a sponsor of. To somehow deal with a strategy of that expert area, that's part of my role as well, and that's cybersecurity, functional safety, and management consulting. So in a certain way, there's always kind of direction, idea sharing with these expert areas about what I see out there and what the other people see, and by that discussion, we try to find out in what direction we need to go with a certain expert area.
Fascinating. So I see that there are 3 biggest disruptions coming in the automotive industry. Electrification of cars, connected cars, and finally the most important one, autonomous vehicle. So what's your thought on that? How should companies like yourself, at the same time engineering service companies who actually build ECU softwares, how should we prepare for this disruption? Do you think there are ways to take advantage of this disruption for us, of company of our size?
Oh, well, for sure. I guess we have to, however, look at these 3 things, let's say, in 2 different ways. First of all, I consider autonomous drive and let's say e-mobility, electric powertrains, as technological challenges mainly. And as we have seen in the past with the automotive industry was quite successful in changing the technology of vehicles. So I'm quite confident that companies that exist today and that enter the market in these areas will master that. But that doesn't change the industry as such. And therefore I would say that's one segment where the typical pattern of the automotive industry somehow kicks in, which is, okay, we have to, let's say, engineer a product, a functionality, and therefore there are engineering service companies that help the OEMs or tier 1s in the development of these functionalities, and therefore there's definitely some kind of business with that regard. There's also, when such things kick in, kind of a need for changes in how we operate on the process side and maybe on the organizational side, and that's part of the business we do. So we support customers in the field of autonomous drive and e-mobility in various ways. Is it cybersecurity? Is it functional safety? Is it automotive spice? Is it management consulting, organization change? So there's definitely business for us. However, there's something and that's the second part that is different from that, and that's the connected car. The connected car will change the industry. And by that I don't mean that we may see new player or that we have, let's say, just another set of features like Spotify in our car. The big thing is it will turn, or it will create a new demand for the major players, especially the OEMs, because so far OEMs were companies that mass-produced cars, essentially. They engineered cars, they mass-produced cars, they sold it to, let's say, anonymous group of people, more or less black and white spoken. But that will change. With connected cars, you need to understand the need of the person that drives the car, that owns the car. And therefore, OEM business will to a certain extent become retail business. It will adopt these characteristics to a certain extent. You need to know your local market very precisely. You need to engineer for a local market. You need to be on 24/7 for the individual vehicle because services need to be maintained and supported 24/7. They evolve over time geographically and content-wise. So it's no longer the situation that an OEM, once a car got sold, he only dealt with the spare parts. Now it's 24/7 being in contact with that vehicle, with that car, with that person in that car. And that may create and add value for the OEM. But most important is, if the connected car doesn't really fit into the ecosystem of the person that currently drives the car or is in the car, then the car is not really attractive. Therefore, to understand these ecosystems, to support such ecosystems in the very distinct individual, with a very distinct individual focus on that person that drives the car is key. And that's something that requires way more than just the OEM. There's a complete ecosystem, a system of systems essentially that need to be operated and that runs continuously 24/7. You have a network provider, you have backend systems involved, you have service companies involved, you have the OEM. If you talk about preventive maintenance, maybe the repair shops are involved as well. You have the tier ones involved that get some data. So it's a constant data flow that need to be managed and orchestrated. And therefore, this is a completely different way of doing business. It's kind of Google meets Foxconn, or Google meets OEM. The OEM has to embrace the capabilities of the big tech companies in the US or in China. So if you take Alibaba, it doesn't matter too much. They all have the same, let's say, capabilities. And this is the big game changer for the automotive industry. So compared to that, I would say, despite the tremendous amount of money that is required for autonomous drive and for e-mobility, and despite the disruptions by new entrants in these markets, the key thing is the connected car. That's for me the one that really changes the industry. There's also, I would say, there are very specific challenges that are not easy to solve, and that also creates business for companies like yours and ours, but also for many others. There are tension fields, there are contradicting goals that need to be balanced. So for instance, when we talk about we want to develop fast, we usually go for agility. Agility means we delegate power to teams and give them more freedom to operate. But on the other hand, we talk about cybersecurity. And cybersecurity, the biggest threat for cybersecurity is the insider threat. So the person inside the company that causes trouble with regard, that opens a door, a back door in the vehicle. And that requires distrust to a certain extent. So you have the contradiction, you want to trust, you want to delegate, you want to give them, the teams, more power, and on the other side you have to distrust to manage your insider threat. So this is just one of these tension fields. And for us that means that we need to come up with solutions and ideas, creative ways how to support our customers in managing such contradicting goals. And that means for us we have to be vertically integrated, which means essentially we have to have the ability to understand the business situation of the customer, what does it mean for the product architectures, and to derive from that what is the best setup with regard to processes and organizations. And if I look at these challenges, system of systems, these cybersecurity things, balance of trust and distrust and these kind of things, ASPICE by itself is no longer sufficient. Therefore, we came up with Agile, Connected Car, Drive, Cybersecurity, and all these kind of things. So a constant evolution of the portfolio, also manage on the business, work on the business side and the organizational side, our management consulting thing, and to have that vertically integrated, that's key for us.
Fascinating. You came up with several stimulating points. One of them is Google meets OEM. I actually, yesterday with Kai, recorded one podcast about the business cases of Waymo. Waymo has been the valuation of Waymo has been estimated $250 billion, which is several multiple of a traditional OEM. So to our audience, if you're interested in that video, maybe you can click on that card and you can look at that video. So I would like to hear your opinion, why Waymo is valuated at $250 billion. What is the economics, in your opinion, of autonomous vehicle?
That's a quite tricky question. Also, if you just think about Uber wants to go for the IPO right now, and the numbers that are tossed around are in the ballpark of 120 billion. So there's definitely big money involved. I have to admit I'm not really an expert in evaluating companies at that scale. So therefore I probably don't say too much about these numbers. The key thing for me is when we talk about maybe more on a, let's say, level I can address the question, or at least a part of the question to a certain extent, is what does autonomous drive mean? Because many people say autonomous drive, and everybody understands something different by that term. One says, oh, I don't need a driver's license anymore. I just walk down, enter my car, and it brings me everywhere on the planet autonomously. I don't have to care about anything anymore. And this fantasy is probably a bit far-fetched. I would say this we won't see for the next, let's say, 20, 30 years. The reason is there are so many questions to be answered, and the much I appreciate the artificial intelligence and the advancements and also sensor technology, which are the two, for me, key ingredients in that game. Still, there's a long way to go that we really are able to deal with all the detailed challenges that need to be mastered. Just imagine you have a day like today, snow, bad road conditions, and you want to go a bit off-road because you're the house you go to is on an uncharted area. Artificial intelligence, sensors of, let's say, today, maybe stretch a bit into the future, will have a hard time to manage all these kind of driving situations. So if this would be the definition of autonomous drive, I don't see that far, or that in the next 10, 20, 30 years. However, if you think about, let's say, the other extreme, if we have some vehicles that in very, let's say, carefully designed areas, for instance, on an airport or from JFK, New York's downtown New York City on a dedicated lane, if they go there during regular, let's say, traffic hours and with under regular weather conditions, okay, that's foreseeable in a couple of years. So the first thing for me is really what is autonomous drive? And that may drive the evaluation of Waymo and all these companies as well. The second thing is, for all these business cases, The real value probably doesn't come from the autonomous drive itself. It's the indirect value from what can I do with the time of the people that don't need to drive anymore. And then we are back to the connected car. So probably to have the ability to make use of the time or to expose the people who don't need to drive anymore to something else, that may create a lot of the value and may drive the value of these companies. But again, the numbers as such, I have no idea if they are justified. They are way beyond my imagination of numbers with regard to the valuation of companies.
Right. Neither am I an expert, but still, I talked about why I think the business cases. That's why I made that other podcast.
What is your view on it?
What I identified, I agree with you. This indirect view, they're actually creating more time. So we've seen Uber within a couple of years. Uber will file for IPO this year, and the estimation is 120 billion.
Right.
So what they did is essentially they created a company where their expansion cost is literally zero. So they want to add one more car to their portfolio. Zix will have to buy a car. They don't have to buy a car. This is essentially zero. So this kind of companies are known as the exponential organizations by a futurist technologist called Salim Ismail. So Waymo is certainly one of them. So imagine when Waymo comes and say, okay, you don't even have to sell your time to earn money with your car. You're in the office, put our software, your car goes and makes money for you. So this will take it to another dimension. On the other hand, this will be a new ad platform for Google. Thirdly, I think autonomous vehicle is $1 trillion market. If you think about trucks and lorries and all those, so adding up all those, in my opinion, this valuation is justified, but others may disagree.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, interesting points. Definitely the let's say commercial vehicles, they may make good use of autonomous, or at least a certain degree of autonomy in their fleets. So no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have it in our car already today. It's pretty much lane keeping and distance control is automatic. That gives you a lot of comfort.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So we're getting there, and we'll see if it is going to be another 20, 30 years, or is it going to be 5 years? There are different opinions. Your opinion is 20, 30 years.
Well, it depends on the definition. What do you consider as autonomous?
Exactly.
So for the very far-fetched, don't need a driver license anymore. I'm very conservative with regard to other things, like you mentioned, lane keep assist and let's say speed adjustments. So that's already there. It's a continuum at the end of the day. And if people say we have autonomous drive in 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, I would like if they would say, what kind of autonomy do I have at that point in time?
Bonifaz, you already mentioned some of the changes that needs to be incorporated in our existing process, ASPICE processes. Due to this disruptive technology, what else do you think will be needed to be incorporated in the processes, existing development, software development, or automotive development, V-cycle processes?
Well, we talked about functional safety, cybersecurity, agility, but when we think about future cars, there will still be components, or today's cars as well, there will still be components that are developed, let's say, more the traditional way, which is not bad, because the systems engineering we did in the past brought us a long way. So therefore, what we would consider is, or what we consider as a relevant working model for future organizations with regard to the automotive industry is what we call a dual operating system. That essentially means that we have two kinds of working within a company. We may have very dynamic, fast-forming, kind of entrepreneurship entities in organizations. maybe BizDevOps teams, or DevOps as a term, development operation within one team. And if you extend that also to the business side, so that that team also maintains the business case, evolves the business case, and drives that business, let's say, as an intrapreneur in a large organization, you could call it BizDevOps teams or BizDevOps. So that is one thing that organizations open up to more dynamic reconfiguration with regard to new business opportunities. But on the other hand, we will also have the traditional way of doing things when we talk about systems engineering, when we talk about functional safety. We still want to see safe cars. We can't compromise on that. It's paramount. So therefore, the good old way of doing business, developing systems will still be there for large organizations. And to acquire that kind of skill to run these two different ways of doing business within one large organization, that's key. In the automotive industry, a couple of organizations try to do it in various ways. They try to go for joint ventures or service companies, or they did fund startups. All of that is tricky. There is probably not the way how to do it. But in the end of the day, that's probably one of the key things, to have the dual operating system running successfully. That future companies that want to be successful with both customer intimate, focus on the individual person, as well as leveraging from the size of the organization and the financial resources of the organization, that's probably key to these large organizations.
Fascinating. So what do you think, how do you think the safety landscape will look like due to these disruptive technologies in the future?
Well, first of all, safety will stretch beyond the car, functional safety. So we need to consider safety also on back-end systems with regard to connectivity. The second thing is, but that's also already an answered question, so I wouldn't say that's something that's really new. Safety is paramount, so safety over security. In case of doubt, the car needs to be safe, and I have to accept a certain unsecurity or insecure situation. Another aspect is what's already ongoing, the SOTIF thing, as you mentioned before, the safety of the intended functionality. That's a key thing. So it's not just sufficient to develop a product that does not misbehave. You also need to think about the specification of the product, that it is complete, that it matches the let's say, requirements of the outside world. That's a key thing. So these are probably the trends we would see with regard to functional safety. A key challenge here is definitely that the people who deal with, let's say, back-end systems are usually IT people. And let's say, way of working of the IT industry versus the embedded automotive engineers is completely different. The IT side is usually more on the always better kind of thinking when we talk about functionality. In the extreme, app developer goes for the minimum viable product that's out on the market fast and then makes changes on the fly. That's not what we want to see on the safety side. But as embedded meets IT, we have to deal with that cultural thing as well, and definitely should not be underestimated. So when architectures put safety aspects to the IT side of things, then we have that aspect quite dominant in our ball game.
I like the last remark you made. So the softwareization of car, we have seen that. It's totally two different cultures.
Absolutely.
And today we see two things. Traditional OEMs, they are expecting software to adapt to their existing processes, which we have seen is very difficult. On the other hand, switching to absolutely a Silicon Valley-like development environment is also not feasible. We need to find a sweet spot. So what is the sweet spot, do you think, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I guess the only way to find a sweet spot is to tear down the walls. That essentially means we have to come up with joint teams, integrated teams. When we talk about functionality, and that's probably the very first starting point, we should not think about some requirement implementation here and some requirement implementation there. We should think about end-to-end. What is the functionality we want to implement overall? And then we form a team, an integrated team that develops that functionality end-to-end, from the very first idea down to validation, verification, and maybe even operation when we think about biz DevOps or DevOps in that regard. So that's a key thing, first of all. Tear down walls, come up with an integrated thing, integrated team. The second thing is, for such kind of teams, there must be clear rules. These rules are at a quite high level, I would say. So safety first, for instance, as a clear rule, so that everybody in the team understands. These teams also should be set up in a way that is, let's say, diverse. So we should take advantage from the diversity in organization, cultural-wise, but also, let's say, competence and skill-wise. So therefore, when we talk about such organizations and such ways to develop things, it's different from the component-oriented way the automotive industry still thinks to a certain extent today.
Fascinating. So I will move to cybersecurity a little bit. You already mentioned there is a contradiction in the process landscape due to cybersecurity, the freedom and the insider threats are more than 80% still today. All the incidents we see. Insider threat is a big issue. How the process should be tailored, you think, in your opinion, to adopt also cybersecurity? So we have three things. We have softwareization, we have safety, and we have cybersecurity. That these three things need to be incorporated in a harmonious fashion in today's processes. How do you think that should work, especially the cybersecurity aspect? When you said there are contradictions, which I totally agree.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because usually each and every situation we deal with is different. So there is no blueprint for that kind of answer. You have companies that deal with very small components and they are not really exposed to any kind of, let's say, cyber threat for them. Cybersecurity doesn't matter too much. But on the other hand, when we talk about other components that are exposed to the outside world, then cybersecurity plays a bigger role. So from that perspective, first of all, we have to understand that cybersecurity by its nature is completely different. On the process side, I wouldn't see too many changes when we really talk about how a process is designed and crafted and structured. But first of all, people need to be educated in cybersecurity. Everybody. That's a key thing. They need to understand that. The second thing is we have to harden our, let's say, tool landscape. That's a key thing, a very practical thing, configuration management systems. It can't be that anybody checks in code and nobody really verified that code. So it's a clear call for analyzing code. It's definitely something that will come up. Tools are out there that can do that. We have to maintain vulnerability databases. But on a higher level, we need someone who monitors the situation and allows changes to vehicles quickly and authorizes changes to vehicles quickly. So by update over the air or over wire, by wire, when we talk about e-mobility and that kind of thing, you can download software much easier than over the air. Over the air is always a bit tricky, not because of security, but because of the car might be at a stage where it's driving. So how do you deal with an update there? When it's at the charging station, for instance, it's much easier because the car is really stand still. But there are certain things that are quite important to deal with that. It also requires different architectures on the product side. Today's architecture deal with online update is a mess, I would say, from my perspective. Future architectures might be different, but today's architectures are hard to maintain with regard to updates, and therefore also with regard to cybersecurity, to prevent or to resolve issues that happened. So there are many facets that deal with the cybersecurity side of things, and from that perspective, it's definitely not an easy and very generic answer one can give about what need to be changed on the process side with regard to cybersecurity.
Due to these disruptive technologies coming up, the user experience might look different in the future. What do you think the future user experiences will be due to these disruptive technologies?
Oh, thank you. That's a very good question. In the end, user experience is probably the very central thing OEMs need to change at, because so far the product is in the center of the thinking. It's the car, it's the vehicle, and everything else somehow focuses on that. But when we talk about the seamless user experience in the future, when we talk about an ecosystem of services, when we talk about various companies involved in that, it will require that apps, that web pages, that services, that the whole user experience using a vehicle somehow become seamless. And that's something, when we talk about or consider the system of systems again as a challenge, that's something the automotive industry and the value creation network, which is more than the OEM, really need to get much stronger on, need to focus more on. So it's less about the product as such, the vehicle, it's more about the seamless user experience. And that also leads for us to one consequence with regard to preparation. What do we need to prepare for? We need to prepare for really for, first of all, to think in user experience, end-to-end functionalities, but also with regard to wider ecosystems with other kinds of companies involved. We need to support. So far we support from semiconductor to OEMs, but there will definitely be service companies in there as well. And to work in such an ecosystem for an OEM, for a tier one, for service companies, for semiconductor companies, collaboration across company borders, communication in a much wider sense, transparency, openness, agility, speed, reconfiguration of organizations. These are challenges that come with that. So it's a big thing. It's not just that we talk about, I have blue on my head unit and I have blue on my app. It's way more than that.
And what will be the enabler of such user experience? What will be the key factor that will play the role? So your apps, your website, your experience, your vehicle, everything has to have, as you mentioned, seamless.
Yep.
You know, so the user experience should be seamless. So what will be the enabler for this?
It's, well, first of all, to accept that it's no longer just the OEM, it's a value creation network that provides that seamless user experience 24/7 all over the globe. So communication is probably, communication, collaboration, these are the two aspects that provide a seamless user experience. If you don't have that in place as an organization, across the organizational boundaries, definitely. If you don't have that in place, if you don't support that as an organization, you won't establish a seamless user experience in the future.
So we have learned from the internet world that we used to have silos.
Right.
We used to have silos when we came up with standards like OAuth, OpenID, Connect, and such things. So we are actually, we almost have a seamless experience for the users in such domain, in the internet domain. Do you think we can learn something from the internet sphere and apply it in the automotive? I totally understand this. This is a much more complex scenario.
It is, definitely.
It is much more complex scenario. It's not, there wouldn't be any one-to-one mapping, but do you think we should learn from it? Should we expect new standards to pop up?
Well, there will definitely be standards. I fully agree and appreciate your question. There will be new standards. The key thing is probably there also to be open. So open standards, not to believe that the own solution is the only one that really matters, to adopt solutions from others, to try to maybe be a bit more humble also in the way of, okay, if you think user-centric, we have to accept that maybe that user is already in another ecosystem. We should not always try to force the user in our systems. Maybe it's somewhere in certain situations better to support the user in its other ecosystem. So to be a bit more humble in that way is probably something the automotive industry need to learn.
Right. Do you also see potential of this is again, I talked yesterday in my podcast, if you want to have a look, click on the card, that there is a potential of an app store like we have seen in the mobile industry. That was the big bang of Apple, Android, and sort of a democratization of automotive softwares. Today we build software only for OEMs. maybe companies like us will be able to build software directly for the users. And do you think such thing is there a potential for such thing, or is it even a future necessity due to this connectivity and seamless need?
Well, that's a very tricky question, and it goes back to what we discussed about safety, safety first. So there's one thing that will never go away from an OEM's responsibility, in my opinion, which is the car need to be safe. And therefore, either architectures really support such kind of a vision by still maintaining the integrity of the safety of the car, or the architectures don't. And until the architectures support it, there's definitely no chance that this will fly. The second thing is, in my opinion, I'm not sure if this is the right way to go, because then we would create a third app store, and probably 2 or maybe 3 are enough. And if each and every OEM would come up with its own way of doing app stores and the kind of things, then we are back to the question, is it really humble to do it that way? Do we accept the user in its ecosystem, or is it maybe better to accept the user in its ecosystem and to say, okay, I have my kind of business, and there's another business which is maybe the app business that is maybe a bit different. So my personal opinion, that's really my very personal opinion as Bonifaz Maag, and has nothing to do with the company as such. I would probably have a hard time to come up with a third app on navigation just for the sake of pulling it from a third app store.
I fully agree with you. The trend that we see, Waymo ordered 62,000 Chrysler, 20,000 Jaguar. So they are putting their autonomous driving software in a car. So the question is more that this trend, the OBD2 port is now getting open for connecting your mobile devices.
Yep.
So the trend is a little bit toward that direction. That is, the car software is not it's not kind of like guarded by big OEMs. It's getting open for other third-party value provider. So obviously there is no doubt the question of safety, question of security. When you open up the such port OBD2, it's a security nightmare. It can be also a safety question.
Yep.
In my opinion, when innovation takes place, there is no way to stop it. Although we know that this is not safe, it's not secure, it is going to happen. Hence, a question of app store or a lot of third-party softwares come into play. I don't know if it will happen or not. I see a trend. What do you think of that trend?
I'm a bit concerned about that trend, I have to admit, because safety is for me not something that can be compromised. But if I take your question maybe in a bit of different direction, what I definitely see in the industry is kind of a maybe 3-tier model, or three bucket model. We have the strong leading OEMs that develop their own way of autonomous drive and maintain their own vehicle to 100% in the traditional way they always did. Then we have a couple of OEMs and tier ones that form alliances, and they come up with platforms for their vehicles. And then we have a third bucket that we have, let's say, non-automotive companies, for instance, like Google, that provide software that can drive autonomously, or NVIDIA with its drive platform. So there are companies out there that come from outside that provide or give other OEMs that do not have the power to develop their own way the opportunity to build on their platform. And that's definitely something that will continue and evolve and will stay. So I'm quite sure about that. But with regard to apps and OBD, I'm quite concerned about that, and I'm quite sure when we have the first safety problems with that regulators will kick in and will say, we don't support that, we don't allow that. We need to maintain the integrity of safety. But that's again my personal view, that's not a company's perspective.
Absolutely. It's harder, much harder to maintain the safety, because safety has to be looked at
Right.
a entire context,
Right.
that your app ensures the security,
Right.
and
Right.
no matter what label, certified, qualified label you put on the software, safety has to be taken in an absolute context. I fully agree with you on that. Yeah. So, in the end, Bonifaz, I want to ask you this question. So, we are at a dawn of an era where we'll see changes, massive changes, and the changes will be unprecedented. There is no doubt about it. Whether we'll see fully autonomous or not, it's debatable, but we'll see changes, we'll see the disruptions. Due to this disruption, what do you think, in your opinion, the most positive thing that you'll see in the next 5-10 years?
Well, for me, there's one thing that is really the most positive thing, I guess. It's the user-centric thing. So the user comes back into the focus, the driver comes back into the focus. The big companies in the automotive industry will refocus on that. And that's, for me, the most positive thing, because that's how business should be. It should be about the consumer, it should be about the person that uses the device, in this case the car. And to turn back to that is, for me, the most important and positive thing.
Thank you, Bonifaz, so much. It was really interesting having the discussion with you. I was really fascinated. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for watching. Please tell us if you agreed, disagreed with the discussion we had. Write comments below. If you want to participate in our podcast by asking a question, write to me or direct message me in LinkedIn, Zing, or Facebook, wherever you want to, or send an email to podcast@matrix.de. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next episode.
In this podcast show, we bring in the industry leaders and experts in the automotive domain to share their experiences along their journey. The mission of our podcast is to start a dialogue that will allow us to understand the development of automotive industry and where the automotive industry is going. You can ask questions to our guests directly. Just send us an email to podcast@matrix.de. We'll schedule a call with you during the recording and you'll be part of our show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any new episodes. Please share this video to help others get enlightened as well, and that would mean a great deal to us.